checking on everything here. Make sure we're live. Okay. Just checking. I think we're just about good to go here. Okay, so today we're going to be doing today's video is about Jesus versus Horus versus Osiris. Which one of these two is actually more similar to Jesus than the other? So that is what today's video is going to determine. So let's begin. Commonly, when people look this stuff up on the internet, they come across memes such as the one right here in front of us, in which we're given a list of similarities between Jesus and Horus. And it gives one the impression that Horus has the exact same verbatim story as Jesus. But is this true? Does this have any merit? Or is it just a meaningless claim? Well, this takes us to Plutarch and the Egyptian god Sahu. Plutarch discussed in his story called Osiris and Isis, written in the 1st century. Plutarch's Osiris and Isis mentions that Horus was born during the winter solstice. By the way, it's actually Harpocrates, which is a different Horus. There were actually many different Egyptian gods with the name Horus, and Harpocrates is just one of the many gods called by that name. So this isn't necessarily the same Horus that we are usually familiar with, albeit he was often identified with Horus, the very son of Osiris and Isis, that most people are familiar with. The issue here is that even though Horus is born during the winter solstice, the claim that he is visited by 3 wise men when he is born by the Virgin Isis, alleged Virgin Isis, now that brings us to a problem. Isis in Egyptian mythology is never said to be a virgin. Isis had intercourse with Osiris, in which, in this situation, would mean that Horus was not born of a virgin, because that would mean the mother must still be a virgin without having intercourse for that to work, and there is none of that. No evidence of that in any form of the Egyptian myths, not even any version of Horus, for that matter, has a virgin birth story. And that takes us to the star in the east, which is where Sahu comes in. The star in the east, which is the star of Bethlehem, in which the 3 wise men used to get to Jesus. They followed the star in the east. Well, this is not something that would usually be ascribed to Horus. However, speaking on that, this is where Plutarch comes in again. Plutarch mentioned that, just give me 1 second. That sometimes Osiris, okay, not Plutarch, I'm talking about the Egyptian. Osiris was actually identified with Sahu, the Egyptian version of the constellation of Orion. I just had to think of that for a second. Now, that's a big problem for those that believe Horus and Jesus are the same, because Sahu and Osiris were frequently identified with each other in the Egyptian myths. That would make Osiris more similar to Jesus, because he would have the characteristics of the star in the east and the 3 stars of Orion's belt, which would equate to the 3 wise men. Osiris is also often identified by Herodotus with the god Dionysus, whom was put on trial by King Pentheus. Granted, Plutarch also mentioned Horus was also put on trial by Typhon, in which Typhon was defeated when a king of Byblos intervened, proving Horus's claim to the throne. However, keep in mind that this version of Horus, written in the 1st century by Plutarch and Osiris and Isis, is long after the Bacchae. The Bacchae is the one that contains the original trial story of Dionysus. So this is not an original story that belongs to Horus, but one that belongs to Dionysus, which is another fail for the Horus and Jesus similarities. And that brings us to the one deciding factor in this whole scenario of as to whom Jesus is actually similar to. Osiris died and rose again. He descended to the underworld like Jesus. He was identified with the Sahu, which gave him the characteristics of the three stars in Orion's belt and the star in the east. Osiris was identified with Dionysus, was a very highly influential dying rising figure, and not just in Egypt, but also in Greece. Horus takes the avenging role of Osiris's death. Hardly describes the character of Jesus. Might be more equivalent to Archangel Michael, whom defeated Satan after Jesus' apparent crucifixion in the chronology of the New Testament. In any case, that would imply Michael avenged the crucifixion of Jesus in a way. But even then, the story of Michael and Horus are very different, albeit both Horus and Michael did defeat an entity that could be regarded as a rebel without any shadow of a doubt, that being Set, or in the New Testament's story, Satan. But Osiris is the one that is the innocent victim of the murderer by Set, the jealous god. Just like Jesus is portrayed that way in the New Testament as well. So is Dionysus when he gets torn apart by the Titans, when he's put back together by a goddess, which is similar to how Osiris is put back together by Isis. So I think, even though Harpocrates had barely any legitimate similarities to Jesus, Osiris is the one that, in the long run, had the more similarity to Jesus than Harpocrates did. In that case being said, Osiris has more similarities, and therefore let me rephrase. Osiris' similarities to Jesus outnumbers the similarities that Horus has to Jesus. Therefore, I think I can say that Osiris wins this one. He's the one that is most similar to Jesus than any of the aforementioned gods I mentioned earlier, with the admitted exception of Dionysus, considering the circumstances of that, but Dionysus is not a topic of this video necessarily. This was about which one of the two Egyptian gods mentioned in this video is similar to Jesus, either Horus, or a Horus, or Osiris. Osiris turned out to be the case. Thanks for watching.